As some of you may recall, I did a video that talked about the connection between Japan and Korea, at least through their shared history and culture. Though in this case, I want to talk a bit more about Japan and its culture. Though the three things that intrigued me, or at least caught my attention regarding Japanese culture, was haiku, sushi, and ramen. And as you can see, like two of the three things are based on food because well, I happen to love sushi and ramen. Though, like starting from haiku, where haiku itself is, well, as stated, it's a short form of poetry from traditional Japan. However, what most of you may not know is that haiku actually originated from a larger part of Japanese poetry called ranga, as it was originally, or at least the word itself, like haiku, used to be called hokku, right? But eventually they became something more of a standalone poem instead of being a part of ranga poems. And the one who founded haiku, or at least popularized it during the Edo period, was a man named Matsuo Basho, though originally he was called Matsuo Kinsaku or Matsuo Chuemon Munefusa, and he was the one who helped create the Renga poem, which would branch out into haiku or hoku, and as a result, he ended up becoming a very well-known poem or a poet as a result. And interestingly enough, like he actually gets referenced in the video game Journey for the final song called I Was Born for This, which gets played during the end credits after you complete the first gameplay, as during one of the lyrics you actually get two specific Japanese lyrics that state Kono michi ya yuku hito nashi ni kono michi ya aki no kure, which means on this road goes no one, on this road autumn sunset. And it is actually quoted from Matsuo Basho himself, which is actually where I learned about him, because I'm very, or say, a naturally curious girl who wishes to know a lot of things, especially about culture. And like I mentioned before, I like sushi, though my favorite kind of sushi personally is like unagi sushi, as in the eel sushi, because I like how it has, I guess, a savory, but also kind of, well, not crunchy, but it has a very savory taste with a bit of like a crunch, given that it's supposed to be cooked eel, and it's one of the few non raw sushi that I can eat, as I'm not really used to the raw kind. Though I do like the shrimp sushi along with the clam sushi and maybe a bit of the octopus sushi, right? But those are the ones that I can list at the top of my head. Where apparently the earliest form of sushi was called nare sushi, as it means matured sushi, and it was basically a fermented fish or seafood of some kind that was supposed to be placed inside a wooden barrel and doused with salt, right, and also being weighed down with pickling stones or sukemono no ishi, right. So of course, as you can see, it is very much seafood based indeed. Another name for the nare sushi is also funa sushi, as it's named after the carp, which is called funa in Japanese. And in fact, there's actually a real restaurant in Japan, owned by a family that continues the traditional nare sushi method, known as the Kitamura family, and they apparently live in the town of Takashima, while their shop is called Kitashina. Though personally, I've never been there. Though if I ever go to Japan, in the future, if I can afford it, I'd probably like to visit that particular restaurant to see if it lives up to the, I guess, reputation that it has. But I don't know. I wouldn't judge, as I myself, you could say, a lover of seafood, and if it looks tasty or is tasty, then I definitely try it. And now we go to ramen, or as in Korean, we call it ramyeon, right? Or ramyeon, because, well, I mean, that's how we kind of refer to in Korean. Though most of the time, the ramyeon that we eat is the more like the package or even cup noodle version. But traditionally speaking, like ramen, well, it is considered Japanese and spread to other places like Korea. However, like originally it was actually more Chinese inspired, as the wheat noodles were made from the Chinese like style noodles, which imported into Japan, as Japan was known for borrowing and sort of, I guess, adapting different styles of food or clothing or even instruments of some kind. As I mentioned in my previous video focusing on the connection between Japan and Korea. Although in the case of ramyun or ramen, like supposedly it came from the Mandarin Chinese word lamyan, which meant pulled noodles, though it's possible that this may have been a misnomer of some kind, but who knows. Well, apparently the earliest version of the Japanese ramyun was found in Yokohama, or at least like Chinatown's version of, or Yokohama's version of Chinatown. Although we don't know if it actually was inspired by Lamyan, but it's possible that the Chinatown may have sort of given the idea that it was originally Chinese, but like who knows? And another theory is that apparently it was like back in the 1660s, a scholar named Zhu Shunsui ended up becoming a refugee in Japan, and as a result, he handed the earliest version of what would become ramyun to Tokugawa Mitsukuni, who became supposedly the first Japanese person to eat ramen. Though, I mean, it's though most historians and scholars believe that the Yokohama Chinatown version like may have been the one that popularized ramen, as apparently there were a lot of Chinese immigrants who lived there, which would explain why it became or at least it became popular as a result. And it is interesting how something simple as noodles would become such a cultural staple. But then again, like I myself prefer to eat noodles rather than simply just rice or bread, as I guess I just like to kind of sort of, I guess, suck up the noodles or at least savor them as much as I can, or right, especially if they are the thick, chewy kind. And well, yeah, that's basically it. Remember how I talked about cosplay in one of my previous random things I like to talk about videos? Well, this is sort of like an expansion of that, but in this case, I feel like the one place I like to cosplay at is a Comic Con of some kind. And not just the San Diego version, but rather like any kind of convention or Comic Con of some kind, such as like an anime or even a a video game kind of style one, because I feel like those are the places I would probably blend in, or even one that's based on animation. Let's if there are, though most of the time Comic Cons are very like multicultural, or at least they provide a lot of variables when it comes to any form of entertainment or media. And I feel like going there in cosplay, but only with like people I can trust, and if I can afford the money or distance to go there, I definitely want to try it out though. Like I said before, I'm not sure what I would cosplay as, but whatever. Okay, so this is gonna be kind of embarrassing, but because I believe this will get more, I guess, views, but not for the wrong reasons. But rather, I just want to at least be honest about myself in this case, as I will be talking a bit about my, you could say, my personal preferences in men, as I consider myself like straight, though I don't judge anyone who's like of any other orientation or whatever, so like don't start any flame wars or whatever. Though I feel like my personal preference would be guys who are, well, I don't really care much about physical attraction. I mean, sure, if they're handsome, then I don't mind. But if they're like, say, unconventional in appearances, or even have what some people call like deformities or disabilities or whatever. Like, I wouldn't care as long as it's the personality that I'm interested in, as I like them if they're, you say, genuine nice guys, not those like, say, Reddit or dogged nice guys, but rather I want them to at least be gentlemanly, but at the same time have a sense of firmness. As if, say, I make a mistake, they will be able to point out to me, albeit like in a patient manner, or if I end up crossing the line, they will be firm with me if they have to, and I can respect that. As I don't like how there are those guys who are too meek or too, I guess, weak-willed to properly discipline their significant others, as it unfortunately leads to a lot of domestic violence from the opposite gender, which I believe is completely unfair and unfortunately tolerates too much of the double standard behavior that society is so inclined to believe nowadays. And given that I am a woman, but even I have a sense of right and wrong, and know, like, women being abuse towards men is completely wrong, and is, you could say, worse than men being abusive towards women. But I don't know, that's just my opinion. Anyway, and another thing I guess I wouldn't mind is if they were, I guess they had, I guess, what people would call like a sexy voice. Yeah, I'm not sure like how though. I'm not sure if like in real life it would work on me. But then again, like some of my, you could say, fictional crushes have had, like, I guess, decently attractive voices or personalities, and I guess I wouldn't mind if they were taller than me. But if they're short, then I guess I don't mind. And I also do not care for what ethnicity they have, because I feel like it just, I don't know, it gets in the way. As though my parents did say that they wouldn't mind if I dated a guy who was, like, say, white or black or even a different kind of version of Asian, but whatever. Right, and so I have like a list of some crushes. But I'm not gonna say all of it because it's ridiculously long, like you wouldn't believe. But I think one of the earliest crushes I had were Yugi Muto from the Yu-Gi-Oh series, Croco from Rice Krispies, Alphonse Eric from Fullmetal Alchemist, Kirk Langstrom from Justice League Gods and Monsters, and I think like Tails from Sonic the Hedgehog. And I think those are like the earliest crushes that I had. That's just kind of silly. And now I can't stop thinking about like that video from Anna Pantsu where she did a sort of a funny kind of power presentation video like based on the song Gimme Gimme Gimme. Now I can't stop thinking about that video every time I think about crushes. However, I'm not sure if I would respond to, say, flirting of any kind, as I feel like I probably wouldn't get it, or I'd be too kind of creeped out, because I hear a lot of unsavory or shady stories of guys using really weird pickup lines on girls to just, I guess, like, have one night stands with them, but not form any serious relationships, which I definitely want to avoid in my life. Oh yeah, one more thing. I want the guy to also be smart or have similar, I guess, habits or opinions or even similar, I guess, ways of thinking. Well, not entirely, because I don't want to meet like a clone or a copy of me, but I just want him to have his own kind of opinions to be kind of similar to mine, so we don't end up being too like incompatible anyway. Though I understand like there are some who like the incompatible or opposites attract kind of partner, but at the same, I don't know, it would if it worked for me specifically, but who knows, that's just my opinion. Oh right, and they also have like similar hobbies, or you could say similar attitudes towards certain things like me, because I feel like it would help us bond more. As I mentioned in one of my like random things to talk about videos, or at least my previous ones, I talked about the idea of canonicity, or at least when it comes to certain storylines, and how like they sometimes have plot holes or retcons, which I definitely want to avoid. As if I'm going to make something canon in my story, such as like having a certain plot element being called back, or having recurring characters or settings in my story that will flow better, I definitely want to keep it within the same continuity, unless it's one of my standalone stories that have their own continuity, but they're completely separate and thus not canon to the main storyline. But in this case, like if it's say like one of my stories involving my upcoming, I guess, like stories based in something I like to call the spiritual warfare universe. I want to ensure that the characters are recognizable, but while they may not appear in the same story because of like time, or at least like they come from different timelines, different settings, I want to at least make allusions to them to confirm that they do indeed take place in the same universe, thus providing some world building. And I want to make the plot lines and the canon more cohesive and not have so many irregularities to the point where it'll confuse people or just create more plot holes that can be rather difficult to fix. And speaking of stories, like I'm actually planning on doing a bunch of fanfic stories, like starting with my Encanto X Coco story for those of you who didn't know about it, as I put up a link on my main page for my YouTube channel for an archive of our own series that I'm planning, where most of my stories will serve as like either kind of, you could say, what if scenarios or even crossover fics, as crossovers are actually one of the main reasons why I got into writing stories in the first place, as originally I wanted to have my own fanfic, but eventually I decided to create original stories, right? But over time, like I decided to go back to fanfic a bit, only not like for necessarily to make some fluff filled like stories that don't make sense, but I wanted to provide a more realistic setting in my fanfic stories as well as my original ones, even if they don't exactly share the same setting. Though some of my stories will actually take place in the same universe, albeit in different time periods, as I was mainly inspired by that idea from the other fanfic I mentioned a while back, The Many Dates of Danny Fenton, where it involved Danny like going on various dates with different girls from different forms of media, both comic, cartoon, or even anime. And I thought it would be neat to do something like that, except it's slightly more grounded in this case, as though like which story takes place in which universe is it's a bit of a spoiler, but for now I'm trying to focus on my Encanto X Coco story. However, it is a crossover in itself and will actually cross over to other stories. And another theme that will happen within my fanfics is that I want to kind of fix some of the elements that could have been avoided as sort of say a fix fic, as TV tropes would call it, along with elements of accusation fix, as my stories will have very realistic consequences, such as in the Encanto X Coco series, where it's, you could say, a major accusation fic towards the Madrigals, as the Madrigal family, well, they are well-meaning, but unfortunately they're just very dysfunctional at heart, especially towards Mirabelle. I mean, well, there are a few exceptions, but even then, they don't exactly give her a lot of respect that she deserves. Something that the many other characters will actually call them out on, right? With Alma getting the worst of it because of how she indirectly like led to the events of the original movie and by extension Encanto X Coco in the first place. So of course she'll definitely go through a lot of, you could say, bashing and callouts for her actions. Don't worry, like she won't be seen as irredeemable, as this is mainly part of her like redemption in a way, even if it's a very slow and painful process for her, though some of you will probably like enjoy that, as I read some of the comments from, at least if some of the comments are of any indication. And overall, like those are the kind of main, I guess, forms of fanfics that I want to write. And another, or at least two of the recurring themes are the the idea of regret and guilt, and how at least one person or more will experience both in some case, such as like Alma, for example. She will experience a lot of guilt for her actions, as she realizes that forcing her family to be perfect was not what she wanted, especially since like I want to delve slightly more into her backstory regarding Pedro and how his loss ended up affecting her a lot more than what the movie showed us. Right? And overall, it's supposed to, well, not make her like too sympathetic, but I just want to give her more understandable analysis of her character instead of simply demonizing her like so many other fanfics have done. Right? And another thing I like to do for my fanfics is provide my own sense of world building, or you could say canon welding, as Steve Jobs would call it. Some of my stories, or fanfic stories in this case, will take place in the same universe, albeit in different time periods, and I want to include some surprise guest cameos in the process because I thought, well, why not? I mean, it would probably make it more interesting or add more flavor in a sense. Okay, so a little bit of story time that actually happened to me a couple years back. It all started when me and my family went camping one summer, and it was at this place called Killbear. I know that the name sounds kind of ominous, but it's actually a pretty neat place. And we were at this beach where there were these large rocks or boulders that, or stones that made up the area or the dry area where we would sunbathe or sit on in order to warm up, especially when going back in the water. However, during that particular like camping trip, my dad, who was in the water with me, and my sister, he accidentally dropped his glasses in the water because he made the mistake of wearing them while he was swimming, as he usually doesn't wear glasses when he's swimming, as he could see just fine without them. But in this case, he accidentally kept them on and thus dropped them in the water. And because the water was kind of murky at the bottom, it was really hard for him to find it. And because like my sister, well, like, she's not very comfortable with the water herself, and my dad also couldn't really like get those glasses back. Like I was the one who was picked to do it, and we had to borrow these goggles from this one girl who was swimming with her family, I believe. And as a result, I had to dive deep in the water. The water wasn't too deep, but it was still pretty murky and muddy, and it was hard for me to see where the glasses went. The first time it didn't go so well because I wasn't able to hold my breath in very long, and it was, like I mentioned before, too murky and muddy. But the second time, however, I was actually able to find the glasses, and needless to say, I was able to grab them and finally give them back to my dad, who was really happy. And he kind of like praised me for getting those glasses. And interestingly enough, my dad mentioned that one of my grandfathers was actually a really good swimmer, as he was also part of the Korean Navy. Alright, so it's possible I may or may not have gotten that from him. But either way, it was a pretty good camp experience, and probably one that I don't think I'll ever forget.